Today's episode is a little philosophy, and it's going to be Zen and the art of Jeep maintenance. So let's get on it. So if you go hang out with Jeep folks, whether it's online or at a trail ride or anything else, and particularly folks that are driving World War II 6-volt Jeeps, you're going to hear people talk to you all the time about how unreliable their Jeeps are. And you're going to hear them say things like, well, I'm not 100% sure at any given point that my Jeep is going to start. And I'm here to tell you, this is a little bit of a rant, that that's just not correct. Now, in my particular Jeep's instance, as you guys may recall, the motor came out of a 1943 generator, didn't have any time on it, so it's essentially a brand new motor. But I changed nothing on it. I got it running in the generator, pulled it out and installed it. I left everything exactly the same, other than the intake manifold, which was designed for a generator rather than a Jeep, replaced that, and the carburetor. Everything else was pretty much the same that was on the Jeep. And the Jeep started pretty well, but not as well as I wanted it to. And so part of what I spent the last couple of weeks thinking about was why it wasn't starting correctly and what was going on. And my symptoms were that the Jeep would start cranking over, and it would crank over at a pretty good speed, so it sounded like it would want to start, and then it would just stop dead in its tracks, and it sounded like it had almost misfired or backfired. It would just dunk. And in fact, it broke the Bendix on my starter. I had to replace that. Now, I assumed at the time that the Bendix was bad and old, but in fact, I don't think that's what happened. And so I started visualizing what was going on in this motor. And this is the philosophical part of this particular show today, that part of being a good mechanic and part of understanding any system is being able to really visualize all the steps along the way that are making, in this case, the motor run. Like, what is the starting procedure and what's happening? And if you'll spend a little time trying to imagine that, and if you don't have the knowledge to understand what's actually happening, there's so many resources out there. If you search around for 40s, for example, films from Chrysler and Dodge and Chevrolet, GMC, all the major auto manufacturers were making great tech films that are now available on YouTube that explain how internal combustion engines work. How do your distributor, how's that working? So you can learn all of this stuff if you want to. And once you can sort of visualize what's happening, you can kind of imagine the steps and what might cause the particular problem. So I started imagining to myself, what would cause the motor just to stop hard in the middle of a cranking sequence? And because I know that the rest of the motor is in good condition, about the only thing I could imagine is that it was firing at the wrong time. And that's kind of a weird thing, but it certainly points you to the distributor. And so I started thinking about my distributor, which hadn't been adjusted, it hadn't been messed with to the best of my knowledge since it was made. It doesn't look like it had ever come out. And when I went to loosen it up and see if I could adjust it, because you turn your distributor to adjust the timing, it was stuck in there. And it got me thinking. And so I pretty quickly became convinced that my distributor was essentially stuck. There's two things going on. They have what's called a governor inside of these distributors. And what it is a mechanical advance that makes the distributor fire earlier as the Jeep motor is sped up, which we can talk about in a second. And so I thought that perhaps that mechanical advance was stuck in the advanced position, or the Jeep simply, the motor had been timed for the generator and maybe it worked at the time and it needed to be retimed. So spent some time and energy getting the distributor unstuck, and I basically retarded the distributor, and the Jeep fired right up. And it runs great now. And in a second, we're gonna start this thing, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. But the one thing that's happened is that it now doesn't have as much power as it did at speed, which tells me that that mechanical advance is not working correctly. So what we're going to do today is, I want to start the Jeep up first. We're going to let it warm up to operating temperatures. Then we're going to pull the distributor out of it. We're going to take the distributor apart, or at least partially apart, and we're going to look at this mechanical advance and how that works, and make sure that everything in there is free, because I don't think it is. And we'll lube that back up. We'll reinstall the distributor. We'll start the Jeep back up, and we'll take it for a test drive. About the only thing we could do that would be more risky is do this on live television or something, because I'm going to start this Jeep. It was 19 last night, according to my iPhone, and it's probably 30 something right now. I got the heater on the shop, but it's cold in here still. You see your breath, it's probably in the mid 30s, maybe it's getting up to 40, but the motor is cold. The oil is thick, so this is taxing the 6-volt system a lot. But I've been working on this thing, as I said, a bunch to get the timing just right, good grounds, everything else, and it should start right up. So if you think about what's going on, it's cold outside right now, and so that means the air is fat, which means that in order to get the proper fuel-air mixture, I need more gas rather than less gas, which in my world means that I'm going to pull the choke on before I start this. I also know from experience with this Jeep that it likes a little bit of throttle, and I'm probably going to have to pump the throttle a little bit to keep it running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the choke out full, make sure the Jeep is in neutral, pull the choke out all the way, turn the ignition on, pull the throttle out just a bit, and we'll see if this thing will start up. So the Jeep started well. I'm happy with that, and that's what you should expect out of your Jeep as well if everything is working correctly. So the scariest thing about removing the distributor is getting it back timed correctly after you take it off. And there are a couple things you can do to give yourself confidence that you're going to be able to do it. First of all, take solace in the fact that the Jeep distributor shaft is only going to fit into the oil pump one way. You can kind of force it the other way, but it really should only fit in one way. So that's one thing. Number two, you can take a picture, and you should probably do that. Take a snapshot of where the rotor is pointed before you remove it. So you can basically know that it is pointed, in this case, at number 2, I believe, maybe number 3 or 4. But take a snapshot of it so that you don't forget where it is. And then there's only one bolt that holds it in. There's a clamp that gets tightened. It's got a 1/2-inch nut on it. So if you reach in and loosen up that 1/2-inch clamp, you're going to be able to pop this thing right out. So the other thing you have to remove here is the wire that comes from the coil to the distributor. Otherwise, you will note that pretty quickly when you start taking it off. So that's it. I should be able to twist this thing and pop it out now. And again, I haven't had this out, so there it goes. Okay. That tab is offset, in this case, this way. Now, I had this thing set up, so this is going to go on the top. So no matter what I do here, it only goes in that way. So I don't really have to be so scared about what I've done, and I'm not going to move anything else here. I also had marked beforehand, I marked the distributor when I was working on it before, and so I roughly speaking know where it's going to go. And of course, once I get the shaft in, I can twist this. I know the shaft's going to go like this. So we're going to remove, this is called the top plate or the plate, and we're going to remove that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the points and what have you. But it's just held on with 2 little screws here. These 2 weights, as the speed of the distributor increases, the weights, centrifugal force throws the weights out, and it moves. And as it moves, it twists and causes the distributor to advance a little bit. So the timing happens. And if you think about what's going on, the distributors come in, number 1 is coming up to top dead center, and the distributor hits the point. The spark goes down the coil through the cap and hits the spark plug and fires. When the Jeep is idling or a motor is idling, it's not moving very quickly. And so any lag time between the time that the spark is made and the time it actually reaches the spark plug and it ignites is kind of immaterial. When you're going at 2,500 RPM or sort of top speed of that motor, that lag time matters. To the faster the Jeep goes, the more advanced the distributor becomes, and the earlier that spark happens, so that by the time, because it's happening much faster, it hits top dead center, and that spark has already fired, it reaches at the right time and it goes. And what it manifests as in your Jeep, if this isn't working correctly, is you either set it to run great at full speed, which mine was set, and the Jeep is not really running great at idle because it's firing too early and it's hard on the motor. So it makes it hard starting. Or you get it retarded and get it exactly right for an idle, and it runs great at idle, but it doesn't have any power because basically the piston's already hit top dead center and started going down by the time that the spark plug fires. So you're missing part of your power. And so obviously the system needs to be working correctly in order for you to both have an easy start and also have full power. This thing's not working right. So I'm going to try to get this loosened. If I can't get it loose, the only way to get in there is I've got to drill this rivet out down in the bottom here and take this off and pull the whole thing out and work on it. But for right now, I'm not going to do that. I am going to see if we can't. It's just not been lubricated, and I am going to see if we can't just get it moving correctly. All I'm trying to do is move this out like so, and move it all the way out, and then have it pop back to where it's supposed to be. See, that works good now. See how it's popping in and out? It'll do its thing, which is all we were looking for. People talk about setting point gaps. Most of you guys have probably done this many times. Those who haven't don't understand. This is a cam here. At this part, right, the flat spots, it doesn't touch the breaker points. As you get to the corners here, it's thicker. It opens up the breaker, and that's full open right there. That's what we're checking for in the gap. So it says it's supposed to be 20 thousandths. I stick it in here, and it's a tight 20 thousandths, but it is a tight 20 thousandths. It's a little bit tighter than that, but just fine for purposes of what we're doing here. Okay, so I checked that. You can check it on a couple places because it obviously does it 4 times. It's a little bit, I mean, it's a little tighter than 20 thousandths, but I'm going to leave it as it is. It's running fine this way. So it should just start right up. The Jeep's still showing about 105 degrees. It's in neutral. And again, I don't think we changed anything on the distributor. I changed it slightly, but it should just start up. So let's see what happens. Sounds pretty good. So let's take it for a ride. I'm gonna tighten that clamp up, and then we'll back it out of here. So it's a cold day for a Jeep ride, but let's see what she does. We're up to operating temperature. Chokes off, throttles down. Enzo Ferrari called this America's only true sports car for a reason. Let's see what she's got in her. See, this thing sounds great. It's pulling up a hill like a champ. We're accelerating. So that was all that was going on, gents. This little Jeep, we had a stuck mechanical advance, and now we don't. So we're gonna find out in a second. We'll double check one other thing, which is, I think this is also one of the reasons why it wasn't idling perfectly correctly. So I'm driving uphill in 3rd gear, and it's still doing okay. So I'm gonna pull in here, and let's see what happens when we slow down. How does it idle? Like a champ. Like a champ, gents. Okay. All right, guys. So I think this is another wrap for ShopTime today. A great day in the shop. I got this thing a little bit closer to the reliability that I'm looking for.
It's idling great, it's driving at speed great. It just, I mean, I'm very pleased with how the motor is running. So at this point, I got a few more electrical things I got to work on. I'm overcharging a little bit. I got to get the fuel gauge working correctly. I think I know why that's not right. I got to reinstall the speedo, do some markings. But I think the next episode, we're probably going to have to give you the glamour tour of the Jeep in a cruise. So as always, I appreciate you tuning in. As I like to say, keep your corners square, get out in your shop and make something. Patrick Tipton signing off.